They raised our HOA fees for streetlights, but what the board didn't know is that I secretly own the entire grid. And when I revealed the truth at the meeting, the room went dead silent, because what happened next will shock you. When the HOA board dropped their little announcement at the monthly meeting, you could feel the tension ripple through the room. "Starting next month," the president said, shuffling his papers with fake authority, "we'll be increasing neighborhood fees by $75 per household." Murmurs instantly spread across the room. Neighbors exchanged annoyed glances, but most of them simply sighed, already used to the board squeezing every penny they could. And then came the explanation. "The reason," the president continued in his practiced tone, "is due to the rising maintenance costs for our community streetlights. Electricity prices are up. Repairs are more frequent. To keep our streets safe and bright, this increase is necessary." The words sounded so official, so final, that half the room already looked resigned. After all, streetlights were important. Who wants to live in a dark neighborhood where every shadow feels like danger lurking? Who wants their kids biking home from a friend's house under broken lamps? People would complain, sure, but in the end, they'd pay. And yet, sitting there, I could barely keep a straight face. Because while everyone else was frowning at the idea of losing more money to the HOA's never-ending appetite, I knew a secret that would turn the entire room upside down. A secret so big, it would unravel their carefully rehearsed speech and leave them scrambling for answers. You see, the board had just raised fees to cover streetlight costs. But the one thing they didn't realize, what not a single one of them even suspected, was that the entire streetlight grid didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. Every pole, every wire, every bulb that flickered on at sunset was part of a system I had designed, installed, and still quietly managed behind the scenes. Years ago, before half these board members even moved in, I had stepped up to solve the problem of dark streets myself. I paid for it, I built it, I maintained it, and not once had I asked the community for a dime. And now, sitting there listening to their fake story about rising electric bills, I felt a slow smile creep across my face. Because I already knew. The moment I opened my mouth, their entire plan to squeeze money out of my neighbors was about to collapse. Years earlier, before the neighborhood was the polished community it pretended to be today, it was nothing but half-built homes, raw concrete, and unfinished promises. The developer had cut corners everywhere, cheap materials, sloppy landscaping, and worst of all, a lighting plan that was practically non-existent. When the sun dipped behind the houses, the streets turned into black tunnels. Street after street was swallowed by shadows. You could barely see 2 feet ahead of you. I remember watching kids wobble home on their bikes, their laughter echoing into the dark, their parents calling nervously from porches because the path wasn't safe. Families who wanted to take evening walks instead carried flashlights, their beams slicing through the gloom like they were exploring some haunted trail. Delivery drivers cursed under their breath as they tripped over curbs, fumbling to find addresses. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. That's when I felt the fire in my chest. Something inside me whispered, "If no one else is going to fix this, then I will." You see, I wasn't just another homeowner. I had an ace up my sleeve, a background in electrical engineering. Where others saw dark streets and useless bureaucracy, I saw blueprints, wiring diagrams, and the chance to make the entire neighborhood safer. So I took action, quietly, relentlessly. First, I went to the city. Not the HOA, not the developer, because I already knew neither would lift a finger. I pushed for permits, explained my plan, and convinced them that if I was willing to shoulder the cost, they should at least stay out of my way. It wasn't easy, endless paperwork, endless questions, but I wasn't backing down. Then came the work itself. I bought the poles. Real steel poles, sturdy enough to weather storms for decades. I sourced industrial-grade bulbs, cabling, junction boxes, everything needed to build a grid from scratch. Piece by piece, I wired it myself, sweating through long nights and weekends, the beams of my work lamps the only light in the darkness. Neighbors would peek out their windows, curious. Some thought I was crazy. Others whispered gratitude, though they didn't fully understand what I was building. And slowly, one by one, The streets began to glow. The first night I flipped the breaker, the effect was almost magical. Shadows retreated, driveways lit up. Kids cheered. For the first time, the neighborhood felt alive after dark instead of abandoned. Of course, this wasn't free. I paid for it all out of my own pocket, thousands upon thousands of dollars. But I wasn't reckless. I structured the ownership so that if the HOA ever wanted to reimburse me properly, they could take over the system officially. But did they? Of course not. Instead, the board just enjoyed the benefits, walking around as if the lights had always been there, as if they had orchestrated it all. They collected compliments, soaked up credit, and quietly pretended the grid was theirs to boast about. And I let them, because I knew one day their ignorance would catch up with them. Now, years later, a new HOA board had taken over. Fresh faces, louder voices, and a dangerous appetite for money. They looked at the budget, spotted an opportunity, and thought they could slide a fee hike past the residents without raising suspicion. Most homeowners didn't know the backstory of our streetlights. To them, those glowing poles were just another piece of community infrastructure. The board saw that ignorance as their weapon. So when they stood before the packed meeting, declaring that increased energy bills required every household to cough up an extra $75, they assumed no one would question them. They expected a few groans, maybe a muttered complaint or two, but in the end, silence and compliance. What they didn't expect was me. I raised my hand slowly, deliberately. All eyes turned my way. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the chatter. "Could you clarify exactly what company is billing you for the electricity and maintenance of these streetlights?" The room froze. The HOA president blinked, caught off guard. He shuffled his stack of papers nervously, flipping through them like an unprepared student in front of a teacher. Well, the bills, yes, the bills. They go through our treasurer," he stammered. A beat of silence. I leaned back in my chair, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Interesting," I said, letting the word linger. "Because those lights don't run on your HOA account. They run on mine." Gasps whispered through the crowd. I looked each board member in the eye before finishing. "I own the grid you're trying to charge people for." And in that moment, the room wasn't silent, it was electrified. At first, they didn't believe me. But I had receipts, permits, and invoices dating back to the installation. I even pulled up the utility account number, under my name, not theirs. The entire neighborhood gasped as I explained how I'd been covering the bills for years, quietly keeping the streets safe without charging a dime. The board members' faces drained of color. Their entire excuse for raising fees collapsed in front of everyone. They had been trying to collect money for something they didn't even manage or pay for. Neighbors started whispering, then laughing. Some even clapped. The HOA president stammered an apology, but the damage was done. By the next week, the board had no choice but to roll back the fee increase. They also had to admit publicly that they had no control over the streetlights. Suddenly, people started looking at me differently, not just as a neighbor, but as the person who had quietly invested in everyone's safety for years. I never wanted recognition, but I wasn't about to let the board exploit the community. From that day forward, I drafted a simple agreement. The HOA could either reimburse me properly and take full ownership of the grid, or continue letting me manage it at no cost, as long as they stopped trying to charge people falsely. They chose the second option. And now, every time those lights flicker on at sunset, the whole neighborhood remembers. The grid doesn't belong to the HOA. It belongs to me. And just like that, the HOA's plan collapsed. The truth came out. The fee hike was gone, and the neighbors finally realized who really kept their streets safe. Want more wild HOA stories like this? Don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts, share with friends, and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping tales every week.